McMurtry Award Lecture. As you know, this is a tradition we began last year to honor the recipient of the McMurtry Award, Lynette in this case, as well as the person in whose honor the award was established, which would be Dr. George McMurtry, who's sitting right here. See him wave? Many of you know, I'll call him Dr. George. George was here at Penn State for what, 30 years? Something of that sort. Mostly in engineering, I believe. But he was also one of the co-founders of this, back when it was a school, working with Jim Thomas and others. And the reason it's an award for excellence in teaching is that George himself was, for those 30 years, a committed and inspirational educator, and that's one of his real loves about the university. So this is a fitting tribute to him and his impact in the foundational days of IST, and it continues. And with that, I'd like to introduce Lynette, who is this year's recipient. Lynette is a wonderful person to be receiving this award because she also is committed and inspirational as an educator. She's been here for 12 years, I think, she told me.
Yep.
And she teaches in a lot of different areas, but one thing she's particularly interested in is social justice and the role of information technology in that. For example, she's teaching a course this semester on social media and how it can help or hurt or otherwise influence really difficult issues in the world. And so without further, I wanted to read what was on the plaque. We had to take a photo earlier. Lynette is creative and tireless in her selection and integration of real-world examples of information and communication technology into her teaching activities, in courses ranging from freshman seminars to doctoral research foundations. She guides her students to recognize and articulate how technologies that they often take for granted are having powerful effects on individuals, social groups, organizations, and cultures. With that, Lynette Kvasny.
So I just wanted to thank you all for coming. I know it's Friday afternoon, and you don't have to be here. You chose to be here, which is always helpful. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my worldview with respect to teaching. And with that in mind, although it's termed a lecture, I'm not a lecturer by any stretch. So I welcome any comments or questions that you have while I'm talking. And I'm watching the clock, and I can adjust and flow and be fluid, and that's just my style. So feel free. Okay, so first off, I just wanted to say thank you so much. And it really means a lot to me because I care about my teaching, and I think oftentimes as professors on the tenure track, there's so much emphasis on doing good research and working on that dimension of our triangle that teaching and service sometimes are less recognized. So in my case in particular, I just wanted to say thank you. Okay. So first off, I wanted to start with a couple of quotes, and they're from Paulo Freire. People pronounce it. I kept going on YouTube, like how to say it, and then I looked for Fred, and I'm like, Fred, how do I say that? But he's a Brazilian educator, and he worked a lot in just really people who he calls the oppressed, low-income communities in Brazil and throughout the world. And his idea was that if you can work with people who really don't have much to be inspired about, but there's a quest to learn, and for them, learning could just open a whole new world for them and let them be exposed to a whole number of opportunities. And so that's the spirit of his work, not just teaching people who could afford to attend college, but the world's poor. And so he talks about education as being an instrument that could either facilitate people falling into the status quo, or it could be the practice of freedom, which for him, he's talking about the ability for young people to be critically engaged with the world and to show their creativity. So it's this spirit of starting where you're at, which is why for me, looking a lot at current events and current issues that are in our society, looking at those as a starting place to get students to think about the technologies that they're ultimately going to design and maintain in their professional lives. And then he makes the claim that educators, we have a duty of not being neutral. And so I think what he's getting at there is we don't all have to be raging radicals, but the idea that, you know, your choice of material, what book you pick, what examples you use, the techniques that you use in the classroom, all of those are political in the sense that you had a variety of choices and you chose that one for a reason. So with that respect, education is not neutral. So how I got into this, I was a graduate student at Georgia State, big state university, and all the graduate students in the College of Business have to take a class on university teaching and learning, similar to what Lisa teaches. And as part of that class, you had to write your teaching philosophy and your worldview. And I had no idea. Like, I don't know. Like many doctoral students, you're going because you want to be a researcher. You don't think much about the teaching aspect. But that course really forced us to think about what we liked about teaching. So we started by thinking about teachers who we did not want to emulate, and what were some of the things they did. And you know, those are the people, for me, that made learning really stressful. So there was so much emphasis on attending but not participating. So they give quizzes to make sure you were there, and there are rigid rules about attendance, and if you got there late, they wouldn't mark you as present because you weren't here when I sent the sheet around. And you know, professors that did that kind of stuff were really, they made education not fun. The ones in my experience that were more motivating were people who made class like lively, where we did group work, where we got to ask questions and the professor didn't make you feel like you were stupid for asking. Professors who brought out the best in you and made you want to do good work. And so those are the people that I was thinking about, okay, how do I emulate them? And so I would write about how they find examples that you can resonate with. They give you a chance to have a voice. They are accessible to you. They don't make you feel bad about coming to office hours. They don't call on you in class and say, well, what do, for me it would be, what do black people think about this? And make you the spokesperson of your race or gender or ethnic group. And so it felt like a community. And I could remember some classes at Georgia State, and they would be so interesting, our time would be up, and we would go across the street to underground Atlanta where they have a lot of bars and things, and we would sit there and just continue our conversation. So people like Eve McLean, for those of you who are in MIS, he's one of those really good professors. James Sen was another one. And the professors, they weren't just people who taught you and then you never saw them again. They were like, they became human. And so those are some of the characteristics that stuck out in my mind, but I didn't know how to talk about them. And so I turned my paper in, and the instructor says, what you're talking about sounds like this critical pedagogy. I'm like, what is that? And so I started reading around, and I know my dad was really into Malcolm X and the Black Power movement. And so he had a lot of books around, and one that really always struck me was The Wretched of the Earth, which was by Fanon. And he talked a lot about the experiences of being black and living in what he called the third world. And it's in the same spirit of Orientalism by Said, where they're talking about this relationship between the oppressed and the oppressor, and how that relationship dehumanizes both parties. And so it's a lot about power and politics and identity and your psyche. And so it was interesting to me to think about the power dynamics, because ultimately that plays out in classrooms as well, where you have the professor and the students and that power dynamic. So I thought about that, and then I found out about Freire and his Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is in its 40-something years it's been out. It was a book that's often banned because it's deemed as being too radical, because it's all about helping oppressed people think about in what ways they're struggling, how opportunities have been taken away from them, and how they can change their situation. So it's about praxis. And so people who are in positions of power, they like that. And so it's always this struggle. And so his book has been banned, but it's a very inspirational book for many people. And they'll cite him as being the one person who really inspired their thoughts. Giraud, he was here at Penn State for a while, but he writes a lot about education and educational institutions in particular. And so he writes a lot about critical pedagogy as a way to get students excited and thinking about their world and trying to transform the educational institutions. Bell Hooks, she's one of my favorite authors. She's one of the few Black women intellectuals who write a lot of books, and she writes about a variety of subjects, but one is the act of teaching. And for her, she talks about teaching as transgression, as a way, again, this power dynamic, and teaching students to assert she talks about teaching as being self-affirming. So how can you become yourself through education? And the other books there were books I read in class in either ethnography or in social stratification, but they're more case studies, ethnographies about what it means to be a person from a low-income community in the case of Kozel and McLeod. Foley's Learning Capitalist Culture is about communities in Texas, one white or Anglo, and the other Hispanic, and how they come to terms with what it means to be American and teens in America, and how do you fit into the workforce. And so those kind of case studies were really helpful for me in terms of thinking about teaching, but also about research. And so I've always been interested in these issues of inequity and power dynamics and how they play out in society, and technology's role in that. And so these kind of the things I was reading at the time that got me onto the path that I'm on. So to push a little further on Freire, he talks a lot about the ideas that are in red, but first of all, experience, and maybe that's better captured as humanity, but it's this idea that we're individuals and we have these rich experiences, and the experiences that I have as, as an American, I grew up in urban New York City area. The time period that I'm born in, the race, the gender I'm born into, those shape my experience with the world. And so the perspectives that I have to offer would be different than someone else who comes from a different background. And you don't want to say someone else's experience is more valuable than another person's. So you have these different lenses and lived experiences, and that makes us human and different. And how can you capitalize on that difference in the classroom? He talks about praxis and conscientization, which is consciousness raising. But the idea is all of us in some way or another deal with oppression, where oppression is really the lack of choice, where you feel like you can't make choices, or if you're faced with choices, none of them are winning situations. You're kind of doomed either way you go. And so if you're trying to get out of that, one of the first steps is this idea of consciousness raising, where you have to be aware of what it is that's holding you down, and going the next step into, okay, I have this situation, this is the reality, this is the structure that I have to deal with. How can I, with my individual agency, find a way out? And it's really tough if you have so many systems of oppressions. You're poor, you're a woman, you're in a community where there are not a lot of resources. It's really hard to think outside of that when some of the most pressing issues you might be facing are, where am I going to sleep tonight? Where am I going to eat? Where am I going to get clean water? And that's the context that he's working in. So trying to get people to work together, for instance, people who might be migrant farmers, and how can they pull together to change their work situation? So this consciousness raising is really key for Freire. These two, the banking concept of education and problem posing, he starts out by critiquing the concept of banking. And he says a lot of times in education, you have the teacher who knows everything, who has the knowledge and information, and I just want to dump it into the students who are empty vessels. So, you know, I'll give a bunch of multiple choice questions. I'll ask the students if they can basically parrot back what I'm asking them. And so it's all about conformity and being rigid and control, whereas posing problems is more of an open kind of classroom environment where you take into consideration the humanity of people and how their reality is their construction. And then for students to think about, okay, this is the current situation, you know, what can we do to make it better? How can we change it? So it's about trying to transform and make the world, the classroom, a more equitable place. And lastly, the way you accomplish this problem posing is through dialogue. And it's not a teacher talking to students. It's oftentimes trying to get students to talk to each other. And it's hard in a classroom because people don't want to take risks. So, you know, you might have to set up a debate, which I found works really well, to get students to actually talk to each other and critique and question each other. Sometimes I have them blog, and then you have to respond to them. Sometimes we do it through humor. I did where they had to make memes, so we did Wednesday. They had to construct a meme about privacy on the social network. So a lot of them were funny, and they had to present them to the class and explain what the meme meant. And it was funny, and it brought some levity, and then people could have a discussion. So trying to find a way for people to have a dialogue where they can trust and collaborate and talk in their own language. Bell Hooks writes a lot about teaching as well. And she says educating is fundamentally political because it's about self-affirmation, becoming yourself. And she writes about her experiences growing up in a predominantly black community where her teachers and just the whole community is working together to try to educate young people. And how that really, how she couldn't experience that when she went to college. She went to Stanford. And she talks about how sterile and how she just started questioning herself. And she realized, you know, if I'm there and I'm this outspoken woman, and she writes a lot about patriarchy and racism and capitalism. And so she's on the far left of her thought. And she said, you know, to even be thinking like this, to even adopt the life of an academic, to be an intellectual, as a black woman in the United States was counter-hegemonic. You're going against the grain. And I think a lot of times in teaching that actually helps because students, they don't have preconceived notions about you. They don't know what to think about me, I think, sometimes initially. It's like, who's this lady? She doesn't look like a professor should look. A technology professor looks like her. And I think that gives me a freedom that maybe other people may not have had. But I think about that question a lot. How does who I am affect my relationship with students? But she also talks about students as being whole beings with complex lives and experiences. And I think that's something we forget as faculty. If we're so committed to, you have to have your assignments in on time. And you know, other rules. And I'm not saying you don't have any rules, but sometimes you have to take the person for the situation they're in. And one example is, I'm teaching IST 130, which is the tech and pop culture. It's a big class. And they have to do these book reviews where they have to read a sci-fi book and write a review and publish it as a web page. And this one student, international student, he says, I'm really having a hard time. I can't make the deadline. I'm reading, but my reading is slow. You know, can I just have like another week so I can have time to read? And it's like, sure, you know, but he was so scared to ask because he felt like I would just say no. And so that's the kind of how they've been conditioned. And so that's why I think sometimes students will just run games and try to get over and feel like they have to lie because they feel like they can't be honest. Because if there's so much, if the system's just so rigid, there's no way out. So thinking about students and what we ask them to do in the classroom, you can't really ask them to take risks that you won't take. So if you want them to open up and talk in class, I think you have to kind of deflate yourself and be accessible to them. And you know, I try to present myself as a full human being as well. School's a place where you change ideas, so it's not for me to sit and lecture to you, but we'll change ideas and argue about points and see what kind of solutions we can come up with. I think a lot of learning is just finding ways to pull people in and get them interested so they'll want to be in class versus trying to coerce them, with quizzes and a strict attendance policy. And also, the classroom should be an exciting place. So I try to have them move around, work in teams. We have flexible agendas where we'll go in and some event will be going on. And like the grad class, we were talking about the Miss America pageant and how social media, how people were being so mean and saying such awful things about our Miss America, who's the first Indian American to win. And so we kind of went off what may seem like a tangent, but we were talking about how social media, how people feel like they could just say these vile things and there's no accountability. And so that's what I mean by a flexible agenda. And so that meant you cut down on some other things that perhaps you were going to do in class, but working with the energy that they're giving you. So, putting this in practice, trying to find some principles that we can talk about. And these principles center around issues of human rights, equality, and trying to build solidarity with the other. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, looking at problems between technology and society. And we'll debate those issues, and then we try to think about, well, what could we do to make it better as technologists? And so working within our sphere of agency, our sphere of expertise, what can we offer? Trying to have dialogues and in a way that diverse people can have their say. Trying to be progressive in the curriculum where we have, a lot of times we center Western civilization, and I think especially at the graduate level. So when I was teaching 503, which philosophy of science, majority of the students were Asian. And so, I had to find some readings that talked about philosophy, but from Asian philosophers. There were some women, so I made sure I had some feminist epistemology in there. So everybody could kind of see themselves in the classroom. And it was really interesting when we got to the section where we were talking about like Buddhist economics, and we were talking about the design of technology and how culture influences that. The Asian students came in and they had this video where it was showing, I think it was like Nova, and it was showing technologies that we have today that were based on ancient Asian cultures, things like takeout restaurants. And the propellers on helicopters came from some toy. And these kids, they just lit up because they knew it. And they were writing papers about Confucius, and it was awesome to see. And so the ability to connect people and bring into the classroom content that appeals to different groups, I think is important. And lastly, part of IST, which is great about what we do, is that we can create things and share what we do in the class. And so what I wanted to do at this time is show some of the content that the kids have done for IST 130. So the first thing I wanted to show is, these are from the spring of last year, so 2012. And we were all mired in the Sandusky Scandal, and a lot of the kids were still reeling from that. And they're like, what can we do? They talked about it in the module where we were talking about news reporting and technology and pop culture. And I'm like, make that your topic. So this is their take on the Sandusky Scandal, and they're really interested in how the mass media portrayed us. They were interested in how students got their news and what were their perceptions about the news. And then they offer some ideas for what we should do as consumers of the news. So I'm going to hit play on this. Don't tell me not permitted. Okay, let's try it again. Just like a kid. Okay. Out of the presentation. Okay, I don't think I'm in view mode anymore. Let's see. Usually at this point they're yelling, do this. Hit Control Alt Delete. Okay. Why is it saying not permitted? There it goes.
Joe Paterno is no longer the head football coach, effective immediately.
A harry night at Penn State. A little after 10 p.m., the trustees come out with a dramatic announcement. Coach Joe Paterno fired. The university president fired all for their role in the child abuse scandal there, and you saw the emotions explode across campus.
We're seeing it again right now, end of an era at Penn State, and mixed emotions, and yes, many unhappy people about it, taking to the streets, fighting with police overnight.
We decided to go to the students for their opinion on the scandal.
We were able to receive the most information about the Sandusky scandal, social media or news.
On social media, definitely.
News, do you know what news reporter, like CNN or? CNN.
I definitely received most of the information from social media.
Did you rely more on news sources or students?
I initially went to students' tweets about their opinions, although they weren't as accurate, they were easier to find.
News sources, definitely the correct news sources, like the Collegian, any of the papers, like USA Today, or anything to find here. I actually try to avoid social media because I feel it's all just crap.
I definitely more social media, just as far as like Twitter and like Onward State, even like I would consider that more social media than news almost. Yeah, social media.
Definitely social media, like Twitter and Facebook.
When you would go onto these social media, would you focus more on like Penn State student tweets or major news network tweets?
I definitely rely on tweets from the real sources, like CNN, because they were the most accurate.
Do you feel that the media turned from the Sandusky scandal to the Penn State scandal?
Yeah. Yes, it is a big quest for ratings. I mean, I don't think, regardless, it should have been the top story of the whole world. I think there are more important things going on. I mean, it's a horrible event, but it's one isolated incident. And stuff like this goes on every day. It doesn't make the same attention.
I definitely feel like the media turned it from the Sandusky scandal to the Penn State scandal because Sandusky isn't a well-known name compared to Joe Pa, and since Sandusky wasn't known in Penn State, Joe Pa and his football team had more stronger impact on people because of the fact that this is not a popular institution and that somebody like Joe Pa and Jerry Sandusky, it doesn't seem like it could happen somewhere like here, but it happens everywhere.
From the news reports I saw, like a little bit, yeah.
I strongly feel that the news definitely turned it away from a Jerry Sandusky scandal to a Penn State scandal to a hey, Joe Paterno scandal, just because they wanted higher ratings, so because everyone knows who Joe Paterno is and who Penn State is. Within 1 week, you didn't even hear the name Jerry Sandusky mentioned at all, so I definitely feel they did that.
What differences did you hear between social media and news about the Sandusky scandal?
I think a lot of people didn't understand really what was going on at Penn State. I mean, there was a huge difference between social media, what was said on social media at Penn State, and what was said in areas outside of Penn State where people weren't witnessing things firsthand.
I feel there was a lot of opinion that wasn't really based in fact. It was mostly like, well, I heard this one news person say this, but they didn't have any sources for it, and now I'm going to take this and extrapolate it further. And now all of a sudden, like, all Penn State kids are doing, like, they support this because their administration said that they were going to defend their staff. That's not really how it went down.
I really feel like the news started it, went from the Sandusky scandal, and then they brought PSU into it, they brought Joe Pye into it, and I think the social media responded. My Penn State friends, they defended it, they still supported Joe Pye, they still supported PSU, and other people attacked it just like the news did. So those, I think, are the differences.
I know on social media it was a lot of like students trying to differentiate themselves from like the scandal, and Penn State students are like separate. When on the news they were kind of reporting like Penn State, like it was more of a collective thing. I think that was like the biggest difference.
The portray of Penn State versus the real Penn State. Social media and memes can be useful tools, however they can also be double-edged swords, providing biased, falsified information. Don't immediately believe everything you see or hear.
So, that was one group. And so the idea of starting with an issue that is pressing to you, something that's interesting, that keeps you motivated. And they had to design the story and come up with the storyboard and what clips do we use, what questions are we going to ask. So we had some time in class that was work days where I'd help them tease ideas out, and that's what they developed as a result of that. So video, I think, is a really effective tool because so many of the students today are visual. And they go to the media commons to learn the techniques. And they have technical problems. They have to figure them out. So it's a semester-long project. It takes a lot of work, but at the end of the class, the last 2 days, instead of having presentations, we have like a film fest. And we watch all the films. And they make people laugh. We ask questions of the people who produce the film as well. So it's a fun way to do something a little different than the traditional PowerPoint presentations. So I just wanted to give a couple more examples of things that I do in class. And I've been looking a lot at socioeconomic class because I think in the popular media, the way we talk about people who are facing economic uncertainty and people who are homeless does a disservice to people and kind of dehumanizes them. So, we spend some time now. So instead of just asking students to just go out and research it or we start with their preconceived notions, and then I give them a particular case to start a conversation, and then in the context of talking about this case, we'll look up statistics about who's homeless and how many people, what ages are the people, and so we start looking more, and then we start thinking about, okay, as technologists, where can we help out? And so this example talks about the South by Southwest conference, which is a tech conference, and it introduces this idea of using homeless people as Wi-Fi hotspots. So they walk around with the Wi-Fi transmitters, and this guy Clarence, he'll just steal your heart. He's funny, it makes the kids laugh, but he has an interesting read on the situation.
And can you tell me a little bit about the project? get on this here site and use my download Wi-Fi right here and help me out, because I am promoting a Wi-Fi service, but I am trying the hotspot for the homeless. We are having stories about ourselves. We are trying to let the public know who we are.
And how much is the service?
The service?
Yeah.
Well, we are asking people for a meal and $2 donation for 15 minutes on the Wi-Fi.
And have you gotten any money yet?
We don't know. We ain't finished working. You need to get paid your paycheck before Friday. Come on, man, you gotta put in the work before you get paid.
And do you know what company is behind this? Are they an Austin company?
It's Austin. Well, it ain't a company. Let's get it straight. Yeah, BB8 is a company that's in New York. These people felt this invention was the thing for today. It's like a newspaper thing. But we don't have to go to buildings anymore. We can do it on the spot.
And so this has made news nationally. And
I heard.
What do you think of people who think that this is taking advantage?
He's a hoot.
They need to come plug into the spice hill and give me some help. These people helping me. People that's talking about me ain't checking out my download. I don't see no green lights on my button right now. That means nobody's on my line. And I'm out here trying to promote my line. So if they're talking about what I'm going through, they need to come right here in front of the convention center where I stand and plug in. Let me get some of these lights lit up. And if that happens, I'll be happy. They can say whatever they want. They can say I'm being distorted. They can say that it's taking advantage, but they're not. I'm at work. I am working right now. There's no more. You don't have to go to Starbucks no more. You don't have to go to the restaurant no more.
So have you been able to use the internet that you're selling?
I don't have a computer. I don't know how to do that now. I ain't into the electronic world. I'm into home. I'm a walking, talking sideboard. I like only something to make the money.
So you know, so you can have an interesting discussion about homelessness. You can talk about digital divide issues because, like he said, I'm not in the digital age. So it's an interesting little clip, and it's short enough where you can start off a session with it and then have students break out in teams. You could do it with the whole class or what have you. More recently, we've talked about this case where a startup founder promises to buy a homeless guy a laptop and teach him how to code. And people really dogged him, like on Reddit and other things. But he held up to his promise, and he gave this guy a laptop with a solar-powered battery charger. And so he's giving them programming lessons. So again, it's like, okay, this is a big problem. How do I, as a computer person, what do I have to do with homelessness? But he just gives an example. And this story was just last week when the new iPhones were released, and how people were paying homeless people to wait in the line for them to get their gold iPhones. And this guy and a group of them got stiffed. And so part of the reason why there were fights breaking out was for incidents like this. So these are all coming from Huffington Post Tech, if you're interested. We talk about ICT and gender. And so this one is really good for the women in class. And so we talk about, sometimes we use history. So this article here from All Magazines is Cosmo. And it's from the 1960s. And it's basically an article that says, you know, technology is, systems analysis in particular, is the computer job for women. And they're citing Grace Hopper, and she says, just like planning a dinner party. You know, you have to know the guest list, the recipes. That's what programming is about. But it was just interesting to me looking at what Cosmo is now compared to Cosmo of the past, where it was helping women to come into a career. So the perceptions that we have about gender underrepresentation, I think we have to put them into historical context. But this other one over here this is from, I believe The Atlantic had a series where they had a bunch of pictures, and someone went to tech conferences and took pictures of the lines for the bathrooms. And so this is the men's room. You see the long, long line, and ladies' room, there's no line. So that's like a funny way to get them to think about gender underrepresentation. And then this last one here is about programmers. It's funny. There's a programmer quiz. I think I hyperlinked to it. And the students like that, but it asks you, can you sling code? And so we play around with this. Are you a dude? And if it says no, then it sends you to sites that are about women. It's funny, but it's useful too, because depending how you answer, it'll send you off to additional resources. Do you sling code or what? But it plays with a lot of these stereotypes. So it lets you have a conversation about stereotypes and maybe, yeah. So it's kind of funny. But humor is a good way to kind of get people to let down their guard. Lastly, in gender, we do a lot with advertising and looking at advertisements. So one thing we do is historically go back and look at IT ads. So this one is, don't feel bad, our servers won't go down on you either. And so you see a lot of the ads play to these idealized notions of men and masculinity and heterosexualism. And then we do some, and these are usually more interesting to the students, but it's about all this thinspo, thinspiration, pro-ana. So all these appeals to women to not eat and in the search of being extremely thin to the point that some women are dying. And then we also look at appeals that advertisements use to entice you for the product. And so here, they'll talk about how women are basically disembodied, where they just take portions of the female anatomy, and sometimes the male, and you don't know what's being sold. Is it the bags? Is it the liquor there, or is it bodies? And so some students choose to do projects around that. Lastly, I wanted to share a project. This is the Gambit Hate Speech Project. It's out of MIT and a university in Singapore whose name escapes me. But they work together, and what they do is they have a graduate student go into an online gaming community like Halo, but they construct a name. Like one name he uses, Proud Muslim. Another one was Proud Black Man. And he just goes into the gaming community, and he doesn't say anything, he's just there to game. And they track how long it takes for someone to say a racist or other kind of hate speech. And so, I show the clip of that, and it just takes a matter of minutes. And some of the language, it gets so bad, you don't see the whole video, just to give you a taste. And so they had to do this reflection paper where they think about that situation. And then thinking about the problems, then what can we do to offer a solution? So this is coming from a young lady in class, her response. And so she starts with speaking from experience. So that thing about experience being important. And she's like, as an experiment. Now, I didn't tell them to experiment. She took it upon herself. I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to go try to play this game. And she's like, I'm not a good player. They knew I was a girl from my voice, of course. But then she goes on to say they could tell from my lack of experience. So kind of internalizing this view that girls aren't gamers. And she says, they're pretty quiet, they didn't care, but when the game, like as they say, when things got real, the guys started taunting her and calling her names. And she said they even went so far as to beg her to stop playing, and it upset her. She tries to downplay it, but it bothered her to the point that she just said, I just stopped playing. And then she goes back to the article, and she starts bringing in some facts to go with her experience. And she says, it goes to show how extremely discouraging it can be when guys are that mean and they make you stop playing. And then she goes one step further and says she actually, by conceding, she gave the guys exactly what they wanted. So you can see this consciousness raising in her writing. So she doesn't stop there. She's like, well, man, I'm going to push a little further now. So she came back a few days later and she asked one of her guy friends to help her. This time, he's talking, but she's playing. So it looks like a guy who can't play. And she said they started bothering them. And then she goes on to say explicitly what they said. And so you could see, what are you, a P word, you could grow some effing balls, and then they just go on. And so language is important. And she said they kept saying these horrible comments until the experiment wasn't fun anymore. And so you could see, something as simple as, I'm just going to go play Halo, could be turn into a bad experience for some people. And the second person, this is a guy in class. He did the same. He didn't go to the extent of doing an experiment, but he's responding to the same question. And so he starts talking about in a class presentation. So the way I do this is one group actually teaches that module for the day, and the rest of the class has to write the paper to respond to it. So he's referring to what his classmates presented. And then he says, although this hate speech doesn't affect everybody, it's really unfortunate. So he's showing some level of, I understand, I maybe not have dealt with it myself, but I can relate. So this relatability, humanness comes out. And so you see him kind of turn to praxis where he's trying to do something about it. And he says, Xbox Live lets users submit complaints. Doesn't really help because it's after the fact. So you've already experienced the problem, and now you're just left to complain. He's like, well, what if we do something else and create a real-time solution where players can actually vote other players out? So if you're being obnoxious, we can basically kick you out. So a community response. And so it was interesting to me, just the role that we could play as allies. So these are just some examples from what I do in class and how I try to make issues of inequality relevant and sometimes fun, but in a way that you don't make people feel badly. And just to end it, any viable form of schooling, we need to be able to have some passion, some faith, and work together to try to make this world a better place. And, it seems like odd to say that in a society where we're all pushing, it's hard enough just to keep your own head above water. But, our survival as a group of people depends on the degree to which we can work together, be part of this human struggle, and create a society that's just so that all of us can have more opportunities. And so that's really the spirit of what I try to do in the classroom. So I thank you all for your time and attention.
So we have some more time here, so if people have questions, I'm sure Lynette would be happy to dialogue.
To dialogue, I'll try. Yeah, Dave.
Do you get a sense, especially for this class, from sort of the beginning to the end, that students can get a really different perspective on how to interact with social media?
I think so, because when you look at the responses, a lot of them will say, and the majority of the class are white men. And so they said, I never experienced that, so it's not my reality. But then they think, when I was playing, I do know I hear it. And a lot of them said it's mostly younger kids being stupid. So some of them see it as it's just young kids being stupid, so it's not salient to them. But others become more compassionate. But I remember one student in particular said, I like your class, but I don't like your class because you make me think about things I don't want to think about. And so that really struck me and stayed with me. So I make people think about things they may not want to think about, but are important, I think, for their development as people.
So in addition to the consciousness raising and sort of learning about themselves and the world and technology's role and everything, do you ever see, I don't know, maybe flashes of inspiration or design thinking from your students, right? So they see something and they say, you know what, there's this thing about the video game, or there's this thing about Twitter, or there's this thing about that. If only we could do that. Do you ever see that kind of reaction?
I have one this semester that's trying to do something like that. So one of the observations, they're doing this digital storytelling. So that's their individual or two-person project. And so it's a guy and a girl, and so they're brainstorming. They're like, we never, it's so rare that we talk to one another. We're IST students, we're in the same class, but we don't really connect. And when we do, someone always has a phone or we're working around a computer. We don't just dialogue. So they're toying with this idea, can we create a day where it's just like no technology? You just sit with someone and talk and get to know them, someone you don't know, who's part of your community. And then we're like, okay, well, how do we do that? And so they're thinking, well, maybe we could do some kind of short video, like a Vine or something, and disseminate it. Maybe we can put something together and have it in Onward State. So, they're now in the process of brainstorming how could we get people to participate, and then we could film and be able to put something together that talks about that day. So they're playing around with that idea, thinking about Twitter and Facebook and Vine and things. Yeah.
Lynette, I have a couple of things. First of all, thank you. The lecture was very, very interesting. Secondly, I'd like you to send that last sentence to the United States Congress. And my question is there a reason Bell Hooks doesn't capitalize either of her names?
She, it's in deference to her grandmother. So I think that was her grandmother's name. Her name, I can't remember her real name. But that's not her real name, it's her pen name. And so, she's like Little Bell Hooks in the sense. She was taking her grandma's name. But I can't remember her real first name to save my life now.
That's okay. I just wondered why there's no capitalization.
Yep. So that's how she just stylizes it. Yeah.
I have a question and a comment. Have you sent the video on Sandusky to Dr. Emmert at the NCAA?
No. No.
I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
My comment, though, is I wish I had heard your lecture, or excuse me, you don't like your talk before I ever taught, because I think I'm one of those people growing up through engineering where everything is in a very rigid format, and I did a lot of lecture.
Yeah, and I don't want to suggest that this is the only way and everybody should. It's just my style. It just works for me as just my personality. I think sometimes for people who like the rigid structure, I probably drive them crazy because, I come in with a plan, and if they start getting off and if they're having an interesting discussion about something else, I just let it go there. And so for people who are like, well, we have 10 more slides. Why is she going back to the, I could be really, I could drive them crazy. So I think the student style, and I notice like I tend to have the same students in multiple classes. And I guess they just, they just kind of like that style. And
another kind of, best practices kind of question. So in order to teach in this flexible style, it's sort of a job for you to have lots of resources.
Yep.
Because in order to be able to roll with the punches, you have to have a lot of punches, right? You have to have a lot of, let's try this, let's try that.
Yeah.
And so that means a lot of preparation relative to a more structured lecture style.
Yeah.
So do you have any, I don't know, things that you do, and of course you're often trying to keep up with current events and technology in current events. Do you have any suggestions for other people how to kind of keep up and have stuff at the ready and, be able to just hyperlink to this, that, and the other thing? I mean, it's almost like a circus. You have to have all planned in advance or have, at the touch of a button, you need to go here or there kind of thing.
I think I'm a heavy consumer of social media myself. So I spend a lot of time, I like Tumblr, so I spend a lot of time there. I don't tweet, but I follow a lot of people on Twitter. And so I find, so I bookmark, I just keep collecting them, and I have like, okay, these are about homelessness, and these are about, so I have my categories. So I have to be an archivist. But I also have students, so in just about any class I teach, if it's not a huge cybertorium class, the first part of class is they're presenting. So they have to find something. So you see, you kind of learn what's interesting to them. And I still have students who graduate, like Rishi Das, and people who graduated years ago. They'll still send me stuff. They're like, hey, yeah, then they'll still send me stuff like on Facebook and stuff. I read this, I thought about your, it's like years later. And my kids do it too. You know, my son is always sending me stuff like twerking's in the dictionary, you know. And,
So you kind of created your own little crowdsourcing.
so yeah, in a sense, yeah, I guess it's a crowdsourcing. Yeah, that's one way to think about it. And so, yeah, and I think that helps. And so you'll show something, and often another thing is getting there early and staying late, because I get more advice and leads just by being there early. And so we were, gosh, this is going to sound bad, but we were talking about, is technology neutral? So the idea we were playing with was prostitution.
Okay.
And so how prostitution was on Craigslist, and then it got ran out, and then now it popped up on Twitter and Facebook and things. And so class is over, because no one really wants to talk about that publicly. And after class, man, you could have talked about Bitcoins, you know, and Square, and you know, there's prostitutes, and they're doing swipes, and but they're Googling this while I'm talking. So sometimes when you have the no laptop policy, you could be missing out too. And so we'll be having discussions in class, and someone will raise their hand and like, I'm on this website and it's talking about XYZ, and they'll have stats or some kind of useful information for that discussion. So sometimes if you limit them and say you can't, no technology,
Right, you'll miss that.
you miss some things too. So it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
And it's just like how to keep them engaged so they're not like going off into Facebook
But then how do you
and
keep
things.
your sanity? Because, I mean, that's a lot of diverse, you know, kind of
Yeah.
thinking and thoughts and resources.
Yeah,
Kind of
yeah.
like a guiding light or something that brings it back.
Yeah, I mean, and so the course I'm teaching now, the social media, every class there's a question that we're toying with, and that's what they have to tumble about. So I think a lot of what we're doing in class is giving them nuggets to play around with, and you know, they write about their own conclusions. And sometimes they'll have pictures and they'll have animated GIFs, and they'll hyperlink to stories. And so it's interesting what they do with the idea. So they're just basically getting raw material and thinking through things. So a lot of group work and peer work.
Fascinating. Thank you. You know, this reminds me of our recent email discussion among the faculty about this announcement by Popular Science online to kind of take away commenting.
Yeah.
Because of the reason. Sometimes the study has shown that a small number of extreme comments can easily polarize people's ideas. So, you know, that's kind of also related to some of your points related to impact of social media today and social justice. And so I was wondering, is that like is there a subtle balance between, you know, freedom and, you know, whether we call it justice or order?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, because at some level you have to have some kind of order, and I think it's about civility. I think that's at the baseline, and so it could be in, like Lessig talks about code as law, but it could be done through norms. You know, your community sets up their norms. You could do it through code, where it's just inscribed in the hardware. You only can do these things, like turning off anonymous comments. Or it could be implemented through some kind of social policy. So there's different, or law, you know, a legal law. So there's different ways of policing. And so that's, I think more than anything, just getting students to think about, you know, their behavior online matters and what they say matters. And we talk a lot about how your digital past can haunt your future. And everything from employment to even becoming a parent. Because one topic we talk about is death in the social network. And so, you know, in your passing and your family to come, your future generations, you know, what kind of digital legacy do you leave behind? And it's kind of profound for them. They're just like, wow, I never thought about it. And the government has a social media will is something that we should all have. And so, you know, thinking about some of those issues. But for me, it's fundamentally about civility, just being kind to people.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, well, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.